Okay, good morning again. This is our 30th session of this Wandering Through the Big Book. We've done a total of 60 something, and we've been working our way through the book fairly methodically, and we're on to the fourth column of the resentment inventory. And I'm going to go over that fourth column and then read from a story called Freedom from Bondage, which is talking about treating resentment. Um, so this fourth column is commonly called the turnarounds, and you'll remember that we've previously, with there in the workbook, there's this two-page. Let me make sure I get this right. This two-page format for working through the columns, and the first column being who you're resentful at, the second column being the cause of your resentment, their behaviors that are burning you up, the third column being affects my, and where we go through what part of myself does this affect when we're looking at things like self-esteem, ambitions, pride, relationships, financial consequences, and so on, and looking for where those parts of ourself are hurt or threatened. And then the book says we look at this list and we consider it carefully. And so, as you will remember, when the book was written, there was no sponsorship as we know sponsorship today. The book was written as a way to carry the message to alcoholics around the country. Um, and the only time you needed another person was for step five. You had to find a trusted closed mouth friend to speak to, but otherwise it doesn't talk about sponsor. You hear sponsoring in the later stories. So so in at this point, there are different approaches to this, and you remember Joe and Charlie saying there's only one wrong way to do the steps. There's no one right way, and there's only one wrong way, and that's not to do them. And several people will say that the first three columns are written by the person doing the resentment inventory, but the fourth column oftentimes takes another person to really look at where are we being selfish, self-seeking, dishonest, or afraid. It's very hard to do on your. I find it hard to do on my own, but if I talk with my sponsor and I say, blah blah blah, and then he can say, seems to me, or ask a question, and help me to see where I am being selfish, self-seeking, dishonest, or afraid. Um, I had a little quibble with selfish and self-seeking because to me it was just plain selfish. But he made the point that self-seeking is when I'm going after something that you've got or the world got that I want, where selfish is I'm holding on to something that maybe you want or I don't want to let go of. I'm trying to keep it to myself. It can whatever works for you is the point. And we've already talked a good bit about this word dishonest because sometimes um, we're not dishonest in an outward way. You'll remember these at least three different forms of dishonesty. One is I deliberately give you false information for some effect. Two is I deliberately withhold true information. I don't give you true information because I'm trying to accomplish something. But the one that most of us are most subject to is self-delusion, where we're not honest with ourselves. And this is I think a lot about the exact nature of my wrongs. And later on, there's a little discussion of rationalization where we rationalize things. And I feel like the ultimate character defect for me is self-justification. I'm trying to use my brilliant intellectual mind to justify my ridiculous behavior, the things that I act on that are actually a form of contempt prior to investigation. I think resentment is a form of contempt prior to investigation. I've concluded that you're wrong. Remember, we read that it's on, I don't know which page, 66 or 64, but to conclude that others were wrong was as far as most of us ever got. That's contempt prior to investigation. I am not, looking at how did I contribute to making this situation more difficult than it already is. And I know I've said before that the truth may be that you were not dishonest, especially in an abusive situation. You may have not been dishonest, and you may not have been selfish. But sure as shooting, you were frightened, and dealing with fear. For me, still consider my anger, my self delusion, my resentment, my denial. These are all um, things that I go to, strategies that I go to handle my fear, that it all starts with fear. And we've talked before in this method of approaching the steps, we're looking at how do I know I have the physical component of alcoholism, regardless of what you call it. And I know that I have that because I've experienced the phenomenon of craving. I know that if I take the first drink, I'm going to take the second drink. There are people that don't, because the normal response is to drink a certain amount and stop. The body tells you to stop. My body doesn't. I know I got the mental part because the book says the failure of the hot stove defense. I do the same insane thing over and over again, as we say, expecting different results. There's a complete, I have touched a hot stove, never did it a second time. Um, but there's a failure when it comes to alcohol, burned by alcohol thousands of times. But the point is, so when you get to the spiritual malady, how do I know I have a spiritual malady? And the answer for me is fear. I fear because I have a spiritual malady. I don't have a relationship with whatever it is, and would all the time. I can tell you God is a very important part of my life. And yet beyond that, I can't say much. I can't define it, explain it, um, anything other than I can tell you, I know it's for real for me. So, so anyway, so what I'm trying to say is make a connect. It all starts with fear, and fear is telling me that I don't have a relationship with God. Because the promise that we read at the beginning is that if I will humbly rely on God, and if I will try to be the person God wants me to be, I will be enabled, I will get the power to match the human calamity with spiritual serenity, with a sense of it's okay, I'm okay, it's going to be okay, whatever. Um, that's how we are taught to handle fear. When I experience fear, I pray for its removal, I ask for redirection, and I do as I'm directed to do. That's the whole process for me in a nutshell. So if we can get to the fear that powers the resentment, we got a chance of experiencing serenity. Um, so the fourth column is where we get to looking at how we handle these situations. And so we're working today off of this worksheet. Um, I'm not sure what I said before about it, but um, there's a wonderful little book called Big Book Awakening, a little thin blue book that came out of a method of sponsorship that started with a man named Don Pritz in Denver, Colorado. And he had a sponsee named Joe Hawk, and maybe some of you have heard his CDs. Quite an in-depth look at the steps and what we go through. And Joe Hawk moved from Denver to Santa Monica, California, and in Santa Monica he sponsored a man named Dan Sherman, and Dan Sherman put together this book, and it's it's hard to work it. I mean, any of you that have tried it, it is not an easy process. You get these instructions, go to page 24, find the second paragraph, look at this sentence, and insert these words into the book. It's cumbersome and it's difficult to do, and very few people get through it. But it makes a lot of points, and it has these worksheets that are really, really wonderful. So you may have heard this before, but if you want to write it down, the website is called thejaywalker.com. thejaywalker.com. If you go to thejaywalker.com, you'll find all kinds of stuff, and they're PDFs. And if you click on a line, you'll see what's there, and it's wonderful stuff. And one of those things that's going to be there is this two-page worksheet that we started into last week. The first page are the first three columns, and the second page is the fourth column. So what the trick is that we were moving across horizontally to this thing happens vertically, and you'll need one worksheet for each person that you're feeling a resentment towards. So it's a little more involved. They're really great about using prayer every step of the way. We went through some of this last week. It starts with resentment inventory. God, please help me see the truth about my resentments. See the truth that my response is anger. I'm angry because I'm frightened. And I'm frightened because some aspect of myself, my self-esteem, my pride, my ambition, my security, my personal relations, my sex relations, my pocketbook is hurt or threatened. That means fear. And so what we're trying to do is find the fear. And if we find the fear, then we know what to do. We pray for its removal and ask for redirection, which ultimately is what 6 and 7 is about. And then we are directed into making amends for the harmful effects of that. And you make an amend for anything that you feel troubled about in your past experience, in relationships or behaviors or whatever. So it's really the start of that thing, and it's a wonderful process. And you can, one thing we haven't talked about quite yet, but the book says people, institutions, principles. Well, what's a principle? Well, it could be gravity, or one of mine was there's no such thing as a free lunch. I want a free lunch. It bothers me that there's no such thing as a free lunch. So I put that in column 1, and then put examples, about I don't believe I can have fun till I've done a lot of work. I don't believe I'm entitled to enjoy myself until I've somehow solved a problem or done some work or done something. Oh, here's George. Oh, okay. Any rate, no, I just thought I'd turn the phone off so I won't get distracted. Let's see. Whoop, lost it. Well, a principle, right? So a principle doesn't have to be true. That's what I'm trying to say. A principle does not have to be a real fact. It can be it is a deeply held personal belief that I have within myself. So when we get into these, particularly when you're working down these affects my self-esteem, how I feel about myself, pride, how I think others see or feel about me, ambition, what I want to have happen here. That's the one that always gets me, because I'm always pretty definite about what I want to have happen. You get in the way of that happening, I get angry at you because I'm afraid it's not going to happen. Security, what I need here to feel safe or be okay. Huge for most of us. Personal relations, this is where principles comes in. My deep-seated beliefs of how this relationship is supposed to look. Not how it looks, but how it's supposed to look. That's my idea of how these people are supposed to be. Sex relations, my deep-seated beliefs of how real men and or real women are supposed to be. Start sentences with a real man, a real father, a real son, a real whatever or woman is supposed to be. That's a principle inside my mind, and it makes a big difference when people are easy because they're out there and they're doing something and we don't like what they're doing and we experience These are much more subtle because they're inside, and there's something that we're holding on to. And again, this is, it's the spiritual appendix is a really powerful little page and a half document that they put in there after a while. And they put it in because Bill is always talking big stuff and absolutes and all this stuff. And they understood a lot of people had this idea that I got to have a big deal God experience if I'm going to stay sober. And the spiritual appendix says, not so. Most of us have the educational variety. It happens slowly. It even says usually other people notice that we've changed before we see it or before we feel it. Um, so then at the end of it, it says, there is one thing that will prevent all spiritual progress. And that's you holding on to a judgment about you or about somebody else or about life or about God, whatever, you holding on to a judgment um, prior to really digging into it. And this 4-column inventory is a way to really dig in to one of our ugliest, most difficult feelings. Um, I I heard a speaker at the Northeast Fellowship of the Spirit in Portland a number of years ago, and she was talking about, I think she was on step 4 talking about resentments, and she talked about delicious resentment, and everybody laughed. The room broke up, and it's just so true. And I had to ask myself, why? I mean, I don't experience a lot of resentment these days. I do, but it's mostly about other people in AA that I don't think are doing it right or something, or I don't know. But I have enjoyed my anger because I've had such a struggle with self-doubt. And what I enjoy about anger is I don't experience any self-doubt. I mean, I'm off the wall and I'm doing something really stupid, and sometimes it has unfortunate effects, but it feels good. I mean, it feels good because I overcome that self-doubt. And what I love in my better moments today, when I can get down to, I can remember, okay, what the one thing that will work for me, I'm convinced, if I will humbly rely on God. And that word humble is the killer. That's not the right word, but where I have the trouble, humbly rely on God and try to be the person God wants me to be, not try to be the person Jack wants me to be. I will be enabled. I will get the power because lack of power is my dilemma always. I can reduce all fear to lack of power. And what I lack power over is me. I mean, that I lack power over the sun and the moon and the tides and you, that's obvious. That I lack power over me, that is not obvious, hasn't been for me. That I can't not experience resentment or fear or remorse when certain things happen. I can't not. I'm powerless over it. And what we're trying to do is gain power. And the way we're trying to gain power is by humbly relying on this, whatever it is, and then trying to be the person that our creator wants us to be. One of Joe Hawk's best lines was, if you're considering, am I a created being? I'm not sure I don't know about that. I know third step says, we said to our maker as we understood our maker. And 7-step prayer says, my creator. I'm not sure about that. It's where we take credit for our own. The worst thing is when you take credit for your own sobriety. I mean, that's the beginning of a serious. Well, never mind. I'm not going to go off on that. Okay, so he says, if you're considering whether or not you created yourself, don't you think if you did create yourself, you could have done a better job? And usually, when he says that, it's like, yup, I could have done a better job. I seem to be, it's not quite the way I want it here, here, or here. So, any rate, we're talking about principles, and I'm trying to get to this fourth column. Um, and we've run through these different words, and they're talking about each one of them, how you define and start sentences with. So now we go to the fourth column. It's headed up with, God, please help me see the truth. And the first thing they say is the realization. How have I done the things I've resented in column 2 to the person I've listed in column 1 and or others? This was our course quote from the book. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick like ourselves. Skip this column if it's not a person. Okay, so we've talked often about the 3 lies that I need to sponsor in order to harbor a resentment toward anything. Lie number 1 is, I am unhappy, but it's not my fault, it's your fault. If you would behave differently, I could be happy. We're tying our personal happiness to somebody else's behavior. Lie number 2, here's a really good idea. I'm going to resent you, and you're not going to enjoy my resentment, and you're going to look at your behavior. You're going to see the error of your ways, and you're going to change. And then not only will you be a better person, I will be happy, and the world will be a better place. So, rah, rah, resentment. Um, Line number 3 is the harder one to see, at least for me. Where have I treated somebody else the same way this person is treating me? May not always be true, but you may find it somewhere. And a continuation of the lie is, that's what gives me the right to resent you, because I could never be this way. I could never treat somebody else this way. Um, that's what this realization is aiming at. In my experience, I often don't get there till I get further along in this process. Um, Fourth column, disregard the other person involved entirely. This is your inventory, not theirs. Where was I to blame? Before, during, after. What did I do? Not what did I think, what did I do? Look at the things you do to hold on to the resentment. Look at the things you do to protect yourself and how you look, how you think. This is contempt prior to investigation. Stay focused on what you've seen so far in column 1 through the realization as you write. Where had I been? Self-seeking. Look around the whole resentment. What did I do? Where was I to blame? My selfish actions or activities were. Selfish. What was my selfish thinking while I was doing the above actions? My selfish attitudes were um, dishonest. What were the lies I was telling myself that resulted in my selfish thinking above? I was in the delusion that, self delusion, contempt prior to investigation. Afraid. What are the fears that drive the delusions above? I was afraid. I'm telling you, I'm always afraid of my powerlessness, and it's my powerlessness over me. And at 10 years sober, I went into the deepest, darkest depression of my life, and I fought it. I did everything. I saw doctors. I tried antidepressants. I'd been working really hard at this process, and I really, um, but you know what I understood when it was over? A couple of things. One is, I understood powerlessness. I understood powerlessness over alcohol. I got that real quick. That was easy. I did not understand powerless over me. And um, until I was feeling so awful that I couldn't get out of bed in the morning and laying in bed most of the day, and hating everything. I'd watch the news and get nauseated. Um, I did not really understand powerlessness or powerlessness over me, nor how hard I have to work at this on a daily basis if I don't want to go back to that. I feel the same way about depression the way I felt about alcohol. I don't want to go back. And I'm willing to work going forward so I don't have to go back. And woe be it to me if I ever start taking credit for any of this. I ever start taking credit for my manageable life. That's the start of the end for me. And that's the power of the word humbly that I need to struggle with that. What does that mean? Humbly. That I'm not as special as I want to be. That I'm not as different as I may want to be. And I'm just another drunk. Um, what are the fears that drive the delusions above? Remember, step 11 says that on awakening, it says our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. Motives is everything in this. Motives is attitude. Motives is what drives my day? What am I trying to do today? And as soon as I get in trouble, I'm trying to remember that reading that we did in opening words. Um, if I will humbly rely and if I will try to be the person I think my creator wants me to be, not the person I want to be. I've struggled with this all my life. And what a relief. You get out from under the tyranny of the human ego. I've been trying to be what my human ego wants me to be so it can have a good time. And fortunately, I have suffered the uh, realization that my ego is, I do what it tells me to do, and I'm happy for 5 or 10 minutes. That's it, 5 or 10 minutes before it presents the next thing that's got to be different than it already is. You know, serenity for me, I don't need anything to be anything or anyone to be different. And I can feel love in this moment instead of, no, this needs to be did. This is not good. I think it's where I apologize for God. You know, we've talked a lot about page 67, 68, 69. Don't do this. Try to do this. Avoid retaliation or argument on page 67. Seek a kindly and tolerant view. Page page 68. Avoid apologizing for God. Instead, let God demonstrate through you what God can do. This is how when I want the world to be different, I am apologizing. When I want you to be different, I am apologizing for God. I wanted my parents to be different. I really thought my suffering was because they were so inadequate as parents, that if they had taught me better, I could have had a happy life. And I carried that anger for a long time. Um, page 69, you know, the power of this, we avoid judging others. We're going to stay out of this controversy. Um, Instead, we're going to ask God to mold our ideals, mold our behavioral ideals, and help us live up to them. That's, you know, step 10 says our next function is to grow in understanding. Mold my ideals. Mold my ideals about the life you want me to live. And then give me the power to be that way. Um, Mold my ideals and help me live up to it. And isn't that step 11? Praying only for knowledge of how do you want me living my life? And then give me the power to live up to them, because lack of power is my dilemma. So, afraid. What are the fears that drive the delusion above? I was afraid. Cleared of wrong motives. This is all about motives. And then he says an interesting thing about at the bottom, Consider if there are any other fears that should be on the fear list. This is a segue. This is a huge segue, this fourth column, into 6 and 7 and 8 and 9. Oh, and not to mention the fear list. Consider the opposite of each fear. If it applies, add it to the list. And then the first one he says is being alone, being committed. So I had a guy a little while ago. We were talking this stuff, and he says I have a fear of abandonment and I have a fear of commitment. I mean, he's toast. It's like, what are you going to do? You have a fear of commitment. You don't want to get committed to somebody else, and you have a fear of abandonment at the same time. And the lack of commitment is going to cause the abandonment. And there usually are, I have a fear of failure. I have a fear of success. I have a fear of not being loved. I have a fear of loving. Usually it's all going to be in there. And then I'll remind you, and then I want to go on to this story, but Emmett Fox saying, vague prayers bring vague results. Specific prayers bring specific results. The more specific, if I pray for the removal of fear, fine. But if I can pray for the removal of fear, what I want to have happen in this situation is not going to happen. Or get into the details, and I'm going to go into another depression. Then I can get a specific result from that fear. Okay, so in our book, there is a wonderful story. It's the second to last story in the fourth edition, anyway, and it's called Freedom from Bondage. And it came into our book in the second edition. I don't know if you've ever done this, but it was years ago. But I went through tracking stories because the preface usually tells you how many stories they took out and how many stories they took in and or were rewritten or edited or whatever, so you can actually track when a story came in to the book. And an example would be Dr. Bob's Nightmare, obviously was in the first edition. The very next story, AA number 3, wasn't in the first edition. It came in the second edition. This story came in the second edition, which means it occurred in the 1940s. And it's a really powerful, I'll just start reading it. So I'm starting, if you've got your book, go to page 549. And it's not the first page of the story, but it's in there. And just to give you some perspective, halfway down the page, it says, I attended my first AA meeting 8 years ago. So now you know something. She's 8 years sober when she writes this. And then an interesting sentence in there. It is with deep gratitude I'm able to say I've not had a drink since that time, and I take no sedation or narcotics, for this program is to me one of complete sobriety. I no longer need to escape reality. Wow. Huh. You mean my drinking was part of an effort to escape reality? One of the truly great things AA has taught me is that reality, too, has two sides. What are those two sides? Well, two I can think of: calamity and serenity. Same things happening, but this says I can match the calamity of reality with serenity. I had only known the grim side before the program, but now I had a chance to learn about the pleasant side as well. I think that's what she's saying. AA members who sponsored me told me in the beginning that I would not only find a way to live without having a drink, but that I would find a way to live without wanting to drink if I would do these simple things. And then she's going to bring up how it works: honesty, openness, and willingness as essential for doing this stuff, the essentials of recovery. Okay, I'm halfway down page 550. I had no problem admitting I was powerless over alcohol. I certainly agreed that my life had become unmanageable. So I just wanted to say, AA number 3, we read this in the 5th step because it's our fellowship's first 12-step call. And If you're ever struggling, it's just a wonderful story to read, because here are Bill and Bob in the hospital with AA number 3. Um, he, um, Bob is 2 weeks sober, 2 weeks. Bill is 6 months sober, and they're making our fellowship's first 12 step call. They don't have the book. They don't even have the steps. They're going on their Oxford group experience. And they asked this guy 5 questions. And it's wonderful to go over when you're trying to understand. The first question is, do you want to stop drinking? And they say, if you don't, fine. We got to find somebody that wants to stop drinking, because we got to do this in order to stay sober ourselves. Question number 2, do you think you can do it by yourself? And they say, if you can, fine, we'll go on looking. We need to find somebody who knows he can't stop drinking by himself. Question number 3, do you have any conception of higher power going? Question number 4, this is where I would have failed. Are you willing to go to that higher power and ask for help calmly and without reservation? I don't do anything calmly, and I don't do anything without reservation, you know. So he in this story, he's um, he says this. It's on page 187. You don't have to go there, but I'm just telling you if you want to find it. I went to this higher power that to me was God without any reservation, and admitted that I was completely powerless over alcohol and that I was willing to do anything in the world to get rid of the problem. I wish for me that had been step 1, instead of my life had become unmanageable, because I really suffered from the delusion that I was managing my alcoholism by going to AA. I don't think I really understood unmanageability till I couldn't get out of this depression. Um, and So I just wanted to say that until that admitted, step 1, admitted I was completely powerless over alcohol and that I was willing to do anything in the world to get rid of the problem. I think we'd have, if this was step 1, I think we'd have a lot more success getting people through these steps. So I don't want to get off on that, just throwing in some. Okay. And then she talks further down in that paragraph, she talks about rationalization. And I'm just going to, well, I'll read it. Rationalization is giving a socially acceptable reason for a socially unacceptable behavior. And socially unacceptable behavior is a form of insanity. So I'm just saying, I think I can reduce character defects down to self-justification, which is where I rationalize my selfish behavior. AA has given me serenity of purpose and the opportunity to be of service to God and the people about me. AA has taught me that I will have peace of mind in exact proportion to the peace of mind I bring into the lives of other people. There's quite a statement, on before the, but where just to the extent that it says that on 68, it says just to the extent. On page must be 66, to the precise extent that I live in resentment, do I squander the hours that might have been worthwhile. It's saying this thing, just the extent that I do this stuff, I will experience this or experience that. So now I'm going to start off on page 551. I've had many spiritual experiences since I've been in the program, many I didn't recognize right away, for I'm slow to learn and they take many guises. But one was so outstanding that I like to pass it on whenever I can in the hope that it will help someone else as it has helped me. As I said earlier, self-pity and resentment were my constant companions, and my inventory began to look like a 33-year diary, for I seemed to have a resentment against everybody I had ever known. All but one responded to the treatment suggested in the steps immediately, but this one posed a problem. Okay, we got 3 ways we treat resentment. One is this 4-column inventory that we go through. 2 is throwing ourselves harder into service, says it all the time. If you're having trouble with this, throw yourself harder into service. And 3 is pray for the resentee. That's what she's going to come to when we get to the next page. Pray for the person that you're resenting. This resentment was against my mother, and it was 25 years old. And look at this. I had fed it, fanned it, nurtured it as one might a delicate child, and it had become as much a part of me as my breathing. It had provided me with excuses for my lack of education, my marital failures, personal failures, inadequacy, and of course, my alcoholism. And though I really thought I'd been willing to part with it, now I knew I was reluctant to let it go. This is all part of the rationalization, contempt prior to investigation, and part of it's self-definition. I am so uncomfortable with my self-doubt. How did I get here? What am I supposed to do here? What's going to happen when I die? What's going to happen if so and so does this or that? You know, and I hold on to self concepts because it gives me some kind of self definition that gives me some form of solidity, or maybe the illusion of power. Recognizing that our unwillingness to let something go is a powerful step toward letting it go. And part of it is this need to self-define. That's why I find it. I'd read that thing, please mold my ideals and help me live up to them. I've read that countless times, and it's only been the last several years that I said, whoa, you know, they're not talking about a sexual ideal. They're not talking about form. They're talking about mold my ideals and help me live up to them. They're talking about me being the person my creator wants me to be, not the person I want to be. I already said that. One morning, however, I realized I had to get rid of it, for my reprieve was running out, and if I didn't get rid of it, I was going to get drunk. We can't live with resentment, fear, and remorse. I had to drink. I'm grateful to alcohol I think I would have committed suicide a long time ago. It helped me stay alive. I didn't want to get drunk anymore. In my prayers that morning, she's saying, I pray every morning. You know, I think it's a requirement if you want to proceed. You got to get to prayer, a morning period of prayer before your day begins. In my prayers that morning, I asked God to point out to me some way to be free of this resentment. And then, whoa, lo and behold, during the day, a friend of mine brought me some magazines to take to a hospital group I was interested in. Oh, coincidence. I looked through them. A banner across one featured an article by a prominent clergyman in which I caught the word resentment. He said, in effect, if you have a resentment you want to be free of, if you will pray for the person or the thing that you resent, you will be free. If you will ask in prayer for everything you want for yourself to be given to them, you will be free. Ask for their health, their prosperity, their happiness, and you will be free. And I love this line. Even when you don't really want it for them, let's see, even when you don't really want it for them and your prayers are only words and you don't mean it, go ahead and do it anyway. And if you don't want to do it, pray for the willingness to do it. Ask God, do you want me to pray for this son of a gun who's making my life so miserable? Do it every day for 2 weeks, and you will find you have come to mean it and to want it for them, and you will realize that where you used to feel bitterness and resentment and hatred, you now feel compassionate, understanding, and love. It worked for me then, and it has worked for me many times since, and it'll work for me every time I am willing to work it. Sometimes I have to ask first for the willingness, but it too always comes. And because it works for me, it'll work for all of us. As another great man said, the only freedom as a human being can ever know is doing what you ought to do because you want to do it. This great experience that released me from the bondage of self, from the bondage of hatred, and replaced it with love is really just another affirmation of the truth I know. I get everything I need in Alcoholics Anonymous, and everything I need I get. And when I get what I need, I invariably find it was just what I wanted all the time. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording and we're going to have some open discussion. And thank you all for being here. Boom. Oops.